We're going to continue talking about fallacies. Recall that the fallacy batch that we looked at last time were informal, and we're going to do more informal fallacies. But the difference for this presentation is that these ones don't necessarily connect up with emotion or pathos. The lecture before was about what I called emotional fallacies, because they were informal fallacies that also count as rhetorical devices. They played upon our emotions. These are just plain mistakes in reason that don't necessarily, sometimes they might, but don't necessarily connect up with emotion. And remember, a simple informal fallacy could be something like, oh, you're from California, you must speak Chinese. Right? There's no bridge, there's no deductive glue, there's no connection between living in California and speaking Chinese. There's no logical guarantee. So these are essentially like that. Common mistakes, except they're more subtle. Not many people would think that living in California guarantees that you speak Chinese. But, as we'll see, some of these fallacies can be believed by a lot of people. So this is sort of a reiteration of what I just said. Remember, a fallacy in general is faulty logic or mistaken reasoning, a bad inference. Fallacious arguments are all invalid. And they're informal because of the semantics, the meaning, or a problem with truth preservation, and it's not the syntax or the structure. Don't appeal to emotion, don't count as rhetorical devices. Okay, that's what I just talked about. So here's the first one. It has this Latin name. We see a lot of Latin in philosophy because it's an old enterprise, and Latin is an old language. It means Latin for the man. This is where you are attacking a person instead of their position. So for example, if I say, you can't believe Jack when he says God exists, he doesn't even have a job. So Jack's employment, or lack thereof, is not relevant to his belief or argument for the existence of God. Or this example, candidate Jane's economic proposal is irresponsible. What a biatch. So, there's no connection here between her character and the economic proposal. So this is a fallacy of relevancy. Here's a comic with two, I guess these might be mallards. We share many genetic characteristics with ducks because we have evolved from a common ancestor. You're closed-minded and stupid. You eat corn. You don't know anything. So the mallard, if that is a mallard, on the right is attacking the one on the left, but isn't really addressing their point about common ancestors. So a lot of times an ad hominem is just an insult that is a distraction or irrelevant to the issue at hand. No, your face is a logical fallacy, right? Again, an insult instead of addressing the issue. So here's an example from my real life. I was with some friends and we were trying to figure out what movie to see, and someone mentioned, well, maybe we should see Toy Story, yeah. It's like toy boat, right? That tongue twister. Toy Story 3. And literally one of my friends said, no, I don't want to see that movie because Walt Disney was a Nazi. So you're attacking Walt Disney, which is not really relevant to the merit of Toy Story 3. So if you click on that link, you can watch Matt Damon, who insults Sarah Palin when she was John McCain's running mate. And I think that there is a mix here of logos and fallacy. He offers some reasons to be skeptical. You know, she has lack of experience. She was the governor, mayor of a small town, and the governor of a state with a really small population, Alaska. So those are reasons to be skeptical about her effectiveness as a leader. But then the way he says things like hockey mom and, you know, her folksy talk, that starts to become ad hominem. And Bill Maher does the same thing in this clip. If you click on that in the other slides online, he even messes up her name and you know, makes another joke about hockey mom. You know, I mean, hockey mom is not really relevant to her, you know, to her viability as a presidential candidate. Okay, so that's ad hominem in general, and there are 3 subtypes. The first is personal attack, and actually all of the ad hominems that we have been discussing up until this point have been personal attack ad hominems. So you attack the person instead of their position or their argument. The second one is called circumstantial ad hominem. Sometimes we mistakenly think someone's circumstances make them biased. Right? Oh, I'm not going to listen to, let's say you give a spiel about how Hillary is a good candidate for president, but then I dismiss you, I dismiss what you say because you happen to be female, and I think that that makes you biased and means that I shouldn't listen to what you're saying, and you have no valid points. Or I could say, oh yeah, well of course you want Obama, you know, you are, you're black, or you're of mixed ethnicities, like Obama, or you know, you think abortion is okay. Well, yeah, you're not even religious, you don't believe in God, so I'm not going to listen to you. So if we dismiss someone because of their circumstances, we think that it makes them biased, then we're guilty of circumstantial ad hominem. Here's some more. Of course you think we should legalize pot. You smoke it yourself. Or, of course you think I should get a job at a research university. That's what you want. So that's an example from my real life. As I was going through graduate school, some people were telling me, oh, you know, get a job at a 4-year institution. You can publish and do research. And other people are saying, no, community college. And you know, if I were to be dismissive of someone who works at a 4-year institution, then I could be guilty of circumstantial ad hominem. But notice that in the marijuana example, just because you smoke pot doesn't mean that you can't come up with a good argument for its legalization. Maybe the person's researched the topic and has a lot of good things to say. And sometimes circumstantial ad hominem is more general than this. You can, whenever you're dismissive of someone because of their circumstances, you're guilty of the fallacy. And the circumstances, you know, we can make a long list. You know, circumstances could be ethnicity or gender, age, socioeconomic status. I'm sure you could think of other categories. Religion is another one, sexual orientation, disability, and weight. So the list goes on and on and on. Whenever these things distort your judgment or cloud your reasoning, then that's where the logos aspect of your psychology can be impeded upon. What do you think about the professor's idea on poverty? You know, whoa, what would that fat white woman know about social justice? You know, so you're dismissing her lecture because of her socioeconomic status and her weight. Maybe you're trying to figure out if you're going to hire someone to tutor a son or daughter that you have. Should we hire that guy? Do you think he was good? Does he have the qualifications? No, I'm not going to hire him because he's homosexual. That's irrelevant to his ability to be a tutor. And then the last sort of ad hominem is inconsistency. So it's true, we have a natural aversion to hypocrites. When people say one thing and they do another, we find that appalling or problematic, as we should. But keep in mind here that being a hypocrite doesn't necessarily make you wrong. Let's say that there was a father giving a cigarette talk to his son, and he says, don't smoke cigarettes, son. Here are the reasons. Here's the evidence. It causes lung cancer, emphysema, teeth decolorization, and generally it just shortens your life. But then if the son replied, whatever, Dad, you're a smoker. You've smoked cigarettes since you were younger than me. So the point in this example is the dad is being a hypocrite for sure. He's saying don't smoke, but he's smoking himself. Notice that his smoking in no way invalidates his argument against it. So who do you think here is guilty of the inconsistency ad hominem? Is it the dad or the son? Well, if you guess the son, then you're correct. The son is guilty of the fallacy. Here's an example from the news about, or a possible example of inconsistency ad hominem. So this is a comic depicting a former candidate for governor, Meg Whitman, and she ran against Jerry Brown and lost. And Whitman here, it was allegedly hired undocumented workers, so that was her action. But then on her platform, what she made statements about and what she ran on was to really crack down on the hiring of illegal workers. So the caption reads, just can't find good help these days. So if it's true, then she said one thing and did another. But notice this doesn't mean that her evidence or her premises in favor of cracking down on the hiring of illegals, weren't good. So here's just sort of a funny inconsistency. It's maybe not the best example, but I just thought it was a funny picture of, a bit of hypocrisy. Police that are supposed to be, working, protecting, this looks like it's Mardi Gras, and they're kind of enjoying the fun. And then finally, here's a funny little short clip of a grandmother smoking pot. So that's just sort of a funny little example of, the grandma might say, don't smoke pot for reasons X, Y, and Z, and she's been smoking it herself. Okay, so that was the first fallacy. This second one is related to ad hominem. Actually, think of it as ad hominem in advance, and that's poisoning the well. This is when we cite false or irrelevant information before the person has even had a chance to make their case. Let's say you're trying to figure out if you should take an economics class, and so you talk to people on campus. Maybe you look at the ratings on the internet, and one person says, no, that professor is a fat bastard. Well, you can see that that's irrelevant, of course. That's an ad hominem. But notice that the ad hominem occurs even before the professor has a shot at doing it is what they do. It's before you've even stepped foot in the classroom. And so the name here might make a little bit sense if you think about it. Imagine that the professor has a well, and you've poisoned his well by talking trash about him or her in advance, and now no one will drink from the well. It's tainted. Should I go see Avatar tonight? No, James Cameron, the director, James Cameron, he's a douchebag. Well, if you accept that, then you have you've been critical of something even before you got to go see it for yourself, really, right? or the person doesn't really bring up something relevant. You know, if they said, oh, it's too long, or, you know, the CGI isn't as good as everyone says that it is, but the person brings up something irrelevant. And so if you don't see it because of something like that, then you and the person putting forth the statement are both guilty of this fallacy. Let's say someone's running for a superintendent, you know, call him Joe Halpert. A loaded question could be, remember we talked about those, a question based on unjustified assumptions. Could be an instance of poisoning the well. You know, when did he get out of jail? So if there's no basis for this, then before the person even gives their speech, they are attacked and for something irrelevant. So it's the information either is irrelevant or false or both. So that's poisoning the well. Next we have genetic fallacy. This is where if you reject a position or an argument just because of where it came from, not because of its merit or lack thereof, but just because of its source, that's genetic fallacy. And our genes are the origins, are the source of our selves and our personality and our dispositions. And the idea is here. And the source is usually a group or an association. So there was a debate about healthcare, and Democrats put forth a proposal in conjunction, in tandem with Obama, and some Republicans might have rejected it philosophically, but others might have just jumped on the bandwagon, and they might have just rejected it just because it was created by the Democrats. They don't like them in general. They don't like that source, and so they reject it. And the reason why I bring this example up is because a lot of politicians claimed that the Republicans were rejecting something that they themselves, in a lot of cases, they themselves had been in support of in other avenues. But because it had the name Obamacare, or it had, you know, the stamp of the Democrats on it, that they just automatically rejected it. Did you hear the report, America's winning the war on terror? Oh, well, that report's from Fox News. That's totally BS. Right? So it might be that Fox News isn't the most objective of news sources. You know, I'm not here to say it is or that it isn't. But let's assume that it is a little bit more colorful than, say, I don't know, CNN, for example. Then, you know, you might take the news reports with a grain of salt, but if you just automatically reject anything that comes out of the news network, that news network, then, you know, that's genetic fallacy. Here's a book by a famous evangelical pastor, Joel Osteen, or Osteen, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. So it's called Become a Better You, 7 Keys to Improving Your Life Every Day. So if you say, oh, there can't be anything good in that book because this guy is just a loony, he's just in it for the money, then that's genetic fallacy. You haven't even looked at it and you've already rejected it just because of its source. The source is, you don't like the source, you don't like the evangelical, you know, televangelists, and so you don't think they could have anything good to say. That's genetic fallacy. Strawman's the next one, and you commit this when you attack a weaker, distorted, watered down, or misrepresentation of an argument or position instead of the real thing. So imagine when you were in elementary school, if instead of beating up the bully that was antagonizing you, you go home and make a, you know those cardboard cutouts of, you know, they have them of fictional characters and celebrities, basketball players. You create a cardboard cutout of the bully and you beat that up instead of the real thing. Well, that's sort of what a straw man is. So if, you know, what if I said, you know, what if I met someone who loves Justin Bieber and they say, oh yeah, I'm actually dating him. You want to meet him? Here he is. And it's just a cardboard cutout. Like you go to their bedroom and they're like, here's Bieber, and they hug this cardboard cutout. Of course you would be like, you're an insane person. What are you talking about? So here's a comic that depicts it well. Step 1, assemble straw man using the distortion, misrepresentation, and simplification tools enclosed. Step 2, knock it down. Step 3, claim victory. That's exactly what you're doing. So here's another example. This went around the internet recently. This is Rick Santorum, who was a Republican candidate for president. And this was posted on the internet, that this was a quote from Santorum. While the Obama Department of Justice seems to favor pornographers over children and families, that will change under a Santorum administration. I will ban all pornography, especially gay pornography. Gay pornography is the reason people choose the gay lifestyle, or what I call the death style. If we got rid of that, homosexuality would be gone within a matter of months. This is one of only a few things I see eye to eye on with the Taliban. And it went around the internet, and people just couldn't believe it. And they said, oh, and what's interesting is they accept, just because someone made a graphic and they typed up the quote and they put Rick Santorum and then, put the little logo at the bottom, people assume that Rick Santorum really said this. And I will admit that when I first saw this, for a moment, I assumed that he said this. But being the logical and critical thinker that I try to be, I looked it up. And if you go to this link here, it shows you that this is just a complete distortion. Santorum said something, something really, really distantly related to this, but this is a complete misrepresentation of it. He essentially said that he would kind of, he would crack down on pornography, and he thinks that it, that doesn't represent the family values and things like that. But he doesn't say, gay pornography is a lifestyle, death style. I see eye to eye with the Taliban. He didn't say any of that stuff. But a lot of people believed it because this went around the internet. This might be a straw man argument of the atheist position. So look at this alleged belief of Christianity. In the beginning, there was an ultimate being which created everything. Is that a distortion of what Christians believe? Think about that for a second. I would say no. I would say a lot of Christians would say, yeah, that actually is, you might want to say more, but, that's kind of if you're going to summarize it in a couple sentences, that's pretty good. In the beginning there was this being that's ultimate. You would have to explain what that means, and that's, God's the creator. So, that's the common belief in a lot of Christian sects. But is this a distortion of what atheists believe? In the beginning, there was nothing, which exploded. So that makes atheists sound dumb and makes their position sound unreasonable. So I think this is a straw man version of what atheists believe. I don't think they think nothing exploded. I think that atheists will say, I listen to scientists. Scientists talk about this Big Bang. There's a lot of mystery involved. There's a lot of questions to be answered. Was there something before the Big Bang? We don't know. But to say that, to characterize this as nothing exploded, is an oversimplification of the belief. Here's a misrepresentation of a Christian position. So it's kind of hard to read this, so I'll read it to you. The Christian says with the halo, "Without God, I am nothing." And the non-believer says, is that what you're really saying? That you minus God equals nothing? So they've sort of turned this saying into a mathematical expression. And the distortion is so subtle that the Christian doesn't even notice it. And in the second strip, or the second box here, the Christian says, yeah, that's exactly what I believe. And so then the non-believer says, okay, so then you minus God equals 0. Without God, subtracting God from you, you are nothing. You are 0. Well, the non-believer does a little bit of algebra, so that's an equation, and one of the fundamental rules of algebra is that you're allowed to add whatever you want to one side as long as you do the same, and the equation will still hold true, will still be balanced. And so the non-believer adds God to both sides, And then the 0 plus God equals God. That's the right side. And then negative God plus positive or plus God cancels out. And then we're left with U equal God. It's simple math. So the Christian accepts that equation and then doesn't realize that the algebra seems correct, that the halo person is God. And so then the non-believer jokes, hey, you equal God? You are God? This is incredible. Praise be to you, O Most High. Any chance for an autograph? So clearly, that's a distortion of the original position. But what's great about this comic is sometimes, and a lot of times I might say, we don't even realize that someone's position has been weakened or distorted. So you really have to be careful to catch everything. And here we have a funny image. The straw man. Your argument did not address my own, but nice try. The dysphomism death panels about the Democrats' health care overhaul, you could argue, is a distortion of what the bill permits. How about this? Let's say we're trying to figure out, should we legalize pot? They're starting to do it in some of our states. Should we do it in California? And this reply represents a straw man. Sure, if you think that being able to buy pot at 7-Eleven, Walmart, and movie theaters is a good idea. A lot of people that want to legislate to legalize marijuana, they want it to be legal to consume, but they don't necessarily want it to be sold at places like movie theaters and Walmart. You know, I think a lot of people would say it would have to be a government-sanctioned marijuana dispensary, or, you know, maybe at drugstores, but it would maybe be behind the counter. So this is not what most people want, I think, when it's legalized. I mean, some people, obviously, but not most, I would say. Okay, here's the next one. Let's start with an example. So here's a billboard I saw in real life. And you can see here in big, bold letters, it's your choice, heaven or hell. So I think to a lot of people, they might think, are those really my only two options? To a non-believer, there's more options, right? There's, you know, maybe nothing happens when you die. To some Catholics, there's a third option. There's purgatory. So that's sort of a state of existence that's neither heaven nor hell. And there are billions of people that don't believe in this Western conception of the afterlife, and they believe in what's sometimes called samsara in Hinduism, and that we know it as reincarnation. So this is an example of a false dilemma. I mean, I'm assuming, if there really is, if it's really you die and it's either heaven or hell, then it's not. So I guess it might not be a false dilemma. But this is what some, like non-believers, like a Hindu would say this is a false dilemma, for example. And in general, it's when a person's they're guilty of this when they assume that there are only a certain number of options. Usually this is 2, but not always, when in fact there are more. So even when a server at a restaurant comes up to you, what's the first thing they say? They say, would you like to start with some appetizers or a cocktail? So they're presenting you with these options as if they're the only 2, because they really want you to have, because appetizers and cocktails are extra and they're expensive, and if you get tipped on 15% essentially of anything that someone buys at a restaurant. So if they can get you to buy these things, it's good for the restaurant, it's good for the server, because they're going to get a bigger tip. But their third option, like what do most people get? I'll just start with water, right? But notice they don't say, sometimes you'd say, like, would you like some water? But nowadays, a lot of you out there probably have been servers, or you know about this. You're trained to not say, like, oh, can I get you some water? You say, like, what appetizer? Here's our new fancy smashy Margarita El Presidente cocktail, or our awesome blossom thing, or appetizer. So here's a joke from The Office. Dwight Schrute, one of the characters, he is searching through the trash of his boss's boss and finds coffee grounds, and he says, oh, coffee grounds. Was he enjoying a hot beverage or masking the scent of smuggled cocaine? Right? Are those the only 2 options? And notice one of them is ludicrous. I mean, well, yeah, obviously. Here's another one. The boss of the office, he's upset that he isn't going to be this, dressed up as Santa Claus. Someone else is dressed up, so he turns his Santa suit inside out. It's a white robe. He pulls his beard down. He sort of looks like Jesus, and so he comes out, and instead of playing Santa Claus, he says, "Oh, I am Jesus Christ." And then the HR person says, "Michael, you can't do this. You can't push religion on people." And then Michael Scott replies with this false dilemma: if I can't push religion, then I can push drugs. It's one or the other. Right? So clearly there are third options like you can't push either of them. So that's false dilemma. If you watch this clip, I really recommend, if you can cut and paste this. I realize that this is a video, so it'll be hard to you can't select this, but notice that these slides they're all online. So if you go to the slide, you can click on the link. But the clip here is really funny, and in the Colbert Report, Stephen Colbert, he, in a bunch of interviews, he asked people to rate President Bush, and the options are great president or the greatest, right? And so all these people are kind of stunned, and they're like, go on, what are the other options? And he's like, no, that's it, you got to pick one or the other. And so that's a funny false dilemma. The link below is a clip, several clips from President Bush about his stance on terrorism. And he said, you're either with us or against us. You are with the enemy or you're with America and you love freedom. And a lot of people's response to that was, well, I don't know if I'm on board with you, sir, President Bush, but I'm certainly not on board with the terrorists. I'm sort of in between. But the way he presents it is sort of like a false dilemma. And then here are a couple other examples I'll let you think about on your own. But I think you get the idea. So here is a specific kind of false dilemma. So this isn't a new fallacy. It is a specific kind of false dilemma, the perfectionist fallacy. So here, instead of there being two options like heaven or hell when there are more options, it's really just one box, and the box is perfection. So in general, it's when we demand perfection when it's really not necessary. We do this all the time. It's sort of all or nothing thinking. A lot of times being less than perfect is okay, but we kind of live our lives. Some of us that are perfectionists just think, if I'm not perfect, then I'm just going to give up. And, that's the only real option. In sports, coaches say this a lot. They go out there and give nothing less than 100%. Well, I mean, if you gave 99%, I don't even think anyone would notice. So, 100% is great, but if you gave 92%, 95, 99, that would be just fine. So there are other options than perfection that are fine. People that are on diets are often guilty of the perfectionist fallacy. They think they gotta be strictly 100% on the diet, and if they slip up a little bit, then instead of accepting that as okay, they'll go nuts and they'll binge, right? So let's say you're on a no-carb diet, you slip up and eat a churro, and then by the end of the night, you have just gone to the refrigerator or gone to the local 7-Eleven, just bought a bunch of junk food and binged out, just because you broke your diet. But the rational person would think, okay, I had one slip up, but in the long run, it's no big deal. I'm to be healthy. My goal is to be healthy, and I can do that, even by eating a churro from time to time. And this image kind of captures it, right? If you're so obsessed with perfection, then your life is gonna be that much. The quality of it is gonna be that much more diminished. You're just gonna be kind of stuck either being so strict on yourself that you're completely miserable, or you're going to fall into the abyss of that kind of self-hatred and rejection for not achieving the perfection. Right, here's a perfectionist writer. Hey, hon, I finally finished writing the first line of my book. It took 3 months, but it's the best first line ever. So the life of a perfectionist look how, you can see the suffering on his face. And maybe you get a little perfection, but it's not going to be sustainable. We're imperfect beings. We're going to screw up. And if you set your standards and expectations too high, you're setting yourself up for failure. So here is kind of the cycle of perfectionism. It says in science, but this is sort of in general. We could apply it. So it's whenever you start off with these expectations that are too high or unrealistic, then inevitably you're not going to reach them. You're going to fail. You're going to give 99% instead of 100. You're going to eat 1 churro instead of eating 0 churros. And then you're going to feel bad, depressed, and you're going to crash and binge, self-blame for the inevitable bad results. You'll go down and down, productivity going down, and eventually the perfectionist will come back, a week later and say, I'm going to try it again. But this time I'll do it right. And you go back to those setting that high standard, those unrealistic expectations. And round the cycle we go. So that's the perfectionist fallacy, which remember is a sort of false dilemma. Next we have the line drawing fallacy, which is related to false dilemma, but a little bit different. So let's start with the what I call the cookie example. Let's say that we were going to make some chocolate chip cookies. Think about what would we need. You could pause and write down a list of ingredients. So if I had a board, I usually draw all the ingredients out. Let's see. We need flour, we need oil, we need sugar, both cane, white sugar, brown sugar. We need butter or margarine. We need vanilla extract. We need salt. We need chocolate chip cookies and eggs. And I think that's it. I might have missed an ingredient or two. Baking soda might be one. So we mix this all together in a bowl and we get cookie dough. And then we get a cookie sheet and we place little blobs of cookie dough onto the sheet. Now, if I asked you, hey, will you bring in cookies to class next time? And you brought in a cookie sheet with a bunch of cookie dough blobs on it, most people would look at you funny and say, hey, this is cookie dough. I wanted cookies. Now, what if I had a contest, and the contest was a race to make cookies, and I say the first one to make the cookies and bring me a cookie gets $1 million. So and I say it's got to be by scratch, and so you make the cookies like we described. You put them in the oven. The box or the back of the package says, cook for 8 to 12 minutes, and the temperature of the oven is 375. So what is the shortest amount of time you could put the cookie dough in the oven such that when you brought the result back to me that I would accept it as a cookie? So the point is that it doesn't seem like we would be able to come up with a specific time. Any time would be a little bit arbitrary. The package says 8 to 12 minutes, but that's sort of a suggestion. And notice that it's not a line, it's a range. So the idea here is that some things are not black and white. When cookies turn into cookies, or when cookie dough turns into cookies, there's not an exact point in time. It's not like 10 minutes on the dot or 8 minutes on the dot. It's gradual. So it might be, and this relates to vagueness that we talked about before, it might be that some things and objects and concepts are inherently vague. There are inherent shades of gray. And sometimes we oversimplify things and think of them as black and white, and that's a mistake. And so that's the mistake of the line drawing fallacy. So it's claiming that imposing a line when it's not appropriate. Thinking of something as black and white when there are really shades of gray. That's the line drawing fallacy. And to contrast this with examples where it's okay to draw lines, think of times where it's appropriate. When Monday turns into Tuesday, it doesn't gradually happen. It happens in an instant like that. Same thing with March into April. It happens in an instant, black and white. It's March, and then it's April. Some of you might be 20 years old. When you turn 21, it's going to happen at midnight on the dot. Think about validity. That's all or nothing. When is an argument valid? Well, when it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. right? There's no gray area. And in real life, we have to draw lines to kind of get along, right? In sports, you got to have a fine definition, a black and white definition of win and loss. You know, some sports there are ties, but most there aren't. But think about these other sorts of phenomenon where a line just seems inappropriate. Whether or not something's a cookie, like we said. Whether or not it's daytime, right? Is daytime the second the sun rises? Well, it's still kind of dark out. Is it 10 minutes before sunrise? Is it 10 minutes after? Well, it gradually becomes daytime. In the Rodney King case, so this was in 1992, which was the arguably the catalyst for the Los Angeles riots. There was video of 4 police officers who were white that were beating Rodney King, who was black. And from the video, it looks like they're just beating the crap out of someone that's unconscious. But the police officers argued that Rodney King was high on drugs, like PCP, and that they needed the force to incapacitate him. And the one of the attorneys in the case said, here, if I play the video and pause it every time there's a blow, we would not be able to agree when the force was excessive. So he argued, since we can't pick a line of excessive force, then there is no such thing. We cannot, without a reasonable doubt, without a shadow of a reasonable doubt, say that the force was excessive. But that is the line drawing fallacy. Okay, here's another interesting mistake in logic. The slippery slope fallacy. Start with the definition. It's whenever you think there's a causal relationship, but you don't really have good evidence. So you think A causes B or will lead to B, but you don't have good evidence for this. Right? This isn't controversial, but pretty good example. Is marijuana a gateway drug? Well, maybe. I mean, people think this because if you investigate people that abuse, say, methamphetamines, how many of them started their drug experimentation with marijuana? So that might be a high percentage. But just because that's the case, it doesn't mean that a significant number of the population that experiments with marijuana are going to go through the gateway and try harsher drugs. Well, legalizing gay marriage. People argue, well, if we legalize gay marriage, what's next? You know, we'll legalize marriage to, you know, first cousins, and then, you know, biological siblings could marry each other, and then you could marry animals. And then when somebody says, oh, you love orange juice so much, why don't you marry it? You would be able to do that. And that ad, the Jack in the Box ad, where there's, you know, a guy marrying a hamburger, you know, a sourdough Jack, that could become a reality. But there's not really good evidence to think that if you legalize gay marriage, any of these things are going to happen. So another example from The Office, the boss says, come on, Jim, a woman Santa, where does it stop? So he's upset that he doesn't get to dress up as Santa, and they let a woman do it. And he thinks, oh, if you allow that, then, you know, what else are we going to let women do? You know, so that's the joke about Michael being sexist, the character in The Office. Let's say you're the parent of a 16-year-old who wants to go out on a date, right? Let's say that you're a father or a mother and your 16-year-old daughter wants to go on a date. Now think about how fast your imagination goes down the slippery slope. You think, oh man, if I let her go on a date, then that's going to lead to kissing, and that's going to lead to a boyfriend, and that's going to lead to sex, and then that's going to lead to pregnancy, and that's going to lead to STDs, and single motherhood, and deadbeat dads, and so by the end, you know, they're living in a gutter, you know, with a baby that's addicted to crack or something. So is there evidence that A is going to lead to B, that letting the daughter date is going to lead to, you know, a single mom that's homeless with a baby that has a substance abuse problem? No, there's not. So that's the slippery slope fallacy. What about this example? So the caption reads, you've been bad, you've been bad, you've been bad. Expect $30 billion in bailouts in your stockings. So the idea here, this is about the criticism of the bailouts. So we bailed out the banks, and the argument was if we didn't, the economic collapse would be worse. So we needed to do it to prevent a worst case scenario. But the criticism of it was that if we start bailing out banks, what's next? Are we going to bail out small businesses, and then are we going to bail out individuals, and then we're going to bail out children? You know, children will think, hey, I can be irresponsible and make mistakes, and I'll get bailed out just like the banks. But, you know, yeah, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. This was kind of an exception, and we're not, just because we bail out banks doesn't mean we're going to do it again, or, you know, in the near future that we're going to start bailing out other things. All right, getting close to the end here. Misplacing the burden of proof. So whenever there is an issue, especially if the issue is not controversial, there is a decided, well, let me rephrase that. There is a side of the debate that deserves what's called the burden of proof. So when there are multiple sides to an issue, it's often the case that one side deserves the burden of proof. For instance, let's take this issue, which comes to us from the animated cartoon Family Guy, whether or not there's an evil monkey living in my closet. If you want to see a clip of it, you can go to that link. So the Chris character, the son of the show Family Guy, he for a long time believed that there was an evil monkey living in his closet. So let's examine this issue. There are two sides. One, we could be like Chris and think that there really is an evil monkey in the closet. Or two, we could argue, no, of course not, that's ludicrous. There's no such thing as evil monkeys, so of course there can't be one living in your closet. So notice that in one, it's Chris that's making the claim, right? He's the one that's kind of bringing it to the table, and we call this an affirmative claim because he is making he's coming out and saying something. You know, he's making a claim about existence. There is something. So he's affirming the existence of something. And also notice that what he's saying is extremely implausible. You know, it's crazy, loosely, and it's very controversial. So when you have these things, then that side deserves a burden of proof. In other words, the person that denies the evil monkey, they don't have to really do any work. They don't have to defend their position. It's on Chris to defend his position because he's making the controversial and implausible claim. 2 does not deserve the burden because it makes sense. So you misplace the burden when you place it on the wrong side of the issue, when you place it on the side that makes sense. All right, let's practice a little bit. So which of the sides deserves the burden? Issue, whether or not the moon landing was a hoax. So you could say, yes, it was. You could be a conspiracy theorist and say that it was all a setup in a Hollywood set somewhere. Or you could say, no, we really did land on the moon. It was not a hoax. So conspiracy theories in general deserve the burden of proof. So the answer here is position 1. Saying the moon landing was a hoax deserves the burden because it is the less plausible side, it's the more controversial side, and that person's the one that's making a claim in the first place. Affirmative, highly implausible, and contestable. Now, with a lot of issues, it's not clear which side deserves the burden. The great debate. Do you put the flap of the toilet paper in the front on side B or in the back? So here, there's not a clear answer. But, I mean, so that just shows that sometimes it's not clear which side deserves the burden, and that's okay. But when the issue is not really controversial, right? You know, we landed on the moon. It's not really, you know, we don't need to debate that anymore. Or there's no such thing as evil monkeys, so we don't really need to debate that. But if someone did want to, they would deserve the burden. It's unclear in the toilet paper case which side is less plausible, so it's unclear which side deserves the burden of proof. Hey, we can't know everything, and that's fine. Sometimes misplacing the burden involves an appeal to ignorance. Have you ever had a debate like this? So a theist, that's someone who believes in God, says, hey, I can prove God exists. The atheist says, okay, how? The theist says, well, can you prove that God doesn't exist? And the atheist says, well, I don't believe in God, but I guess I can't disprove God. So no. Ha! Well, if you can't disprove God, then God does exist. Sometimes we misplace the burden by appealing to someone's ignorance. The theist is ignorant of a disproof for God, but that doesn't mean that God exists. Just because I can't disprove God doesn't mean God exists. That's using an appeal to ignorance. Ignorance. Sometimes it's best not to know. Okay, so this is just sort of a funny picture because you got Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia have an on-screen kiss, and then they turn out to be brother and sister, so pretty funny. So just because I can't prove you wrong doesn't mean you're right. In the case, just because I can't prove God doesn't exist doesn't mean that God does. And I use she just to not be sexist. Also, just because I can't prove I'm right doesn't mean I'm wrong. Notice that this is just sort of an aside that is sort of a related possible mistake. So let's say that there's this 5-year-old that tells a playground buddy that whales are mammals. And the playground school friend says, no, whales are fish, prove it. And the 5-year-old, because they're 5, they know that whales are mammals because maybe they just learned it, but they can't remember why and they forget. So they have no explanation. Does this mean that whales are fish? No. Just because the 5-year-old can't prove that they're right that whales are mammals doesn't mean that they're wrong. Okay, here's one more example of appealing to ignorance. So we got a comic here. The caption reads, "The sun is actually a flaming kitten pulled across the sky by a unicorn named Suzanne, who wears wraparound sunglasses and drives a black Camaro." That's not true. Oh yeah? Prove me wrong. So someone might be tricked into thinking, oh, you're right. It is on me to prove you wrong. And oh no, I can't do it, so I guess you're right. That would be the mistake. But the correct reply that a logical or critical thinker will offer is, I don't have to prove that the sun is a flaming, I don't have to disprove that the sun is a flaming kitten, blah, blah, blah. Because the burden of proof isn't mine, it's yours. Right? If you make an outlandish claim, it's on you to support it. That's one of the bottom lines here. And to finish the joke of the cartoon, hold on, dudes. According to the hypernet, in this zone, the burden of proof is on some guy named Gary. Who's Gary? I am Gary. And so Gary is the slaughterer of the person pulling the unicorn, the flaming blah, blah, blah. And finally, the last fallacy, begging the question, and that should say circular reasoning. Begging the question, aka circular reasoning, is assuming what you're trying to prove. Obviously, that's cheating. So here's an example. Suppose we take a class field trip to, where would you want to go? Let's say we go to the Golden Gate Bridge. And we all take one of those long stretch Hummer limos. And it pulls up to the parking lot. We start walking to it. And then one of you shouts, I get shotgun. Well, hold on. Why do you get shotgun? So that's sitting in the front seat, right? Why do you get shotgun? And instead of saying, well, I called it and that's the rules, the person that says they claim shotgun, they say, well, I get shotgun because I'm the best. But then we push them and say, wait, hold on a second. Don't just jump in that front seat just yet. What makes you the best? And the person replies, well, obviously I'm the best because I'm the guy getting shotgun. You can see the circle here. So they've assumed what they're trying to prove. And whenever an argument contains a premise, and sometimes it's implied, it's not explicitly there, it could be implicit, when that premise is the same as the conclusion, the argument begs the question. So I think it has this name because it's still debatable. It's still a relevant question for debate whether or not the person should get shotgun. Here's circular reasoning for the existence of God. So starting at the top, it says, we know God exists because the book says so, and God wrote the book. So we know God exists because the book says so, and God wrote the book. And so round and round we go. So here is the argument mapped out. God exists. Why? Well, because the Bible says so. Well, how do you know the Bible's true? Well, because God wrote it. Well, if God wrote something, then God exists. And so our premise, we have two premises. The Bible said God exists, and God wrote the Bible. And anything God writes is true, is another premise. But we're trying to prove that God exists. And when you're trying to prove God exists, you can't have as one of your assumptions that God wrote the Bible, because that presumes that God exists. That's what you're trying to prove. So that's cheating. So here's an interesting question. Circular arguments are bad, and we should be on the lookout for them, but are they valid? It turns out that they are. Remember, validity does not equal good argument. Validity means that the conclusion logically follows from the premises, or that the premises logically guarantee the conclusion. And a circular argument is always going to be valid. Take the simplest circular argument, which would just be a conclusion that is a repetition of the premise. God exists. Why? Because God exists. So that's circular, but it's valid because the existence of God certainly would follow from the premise that God exists. So it's interesting. All circular arguments are valid, but that doesn't mean that they're good, because they're not sound. Right? Remember, valid is only half the battle to a good argument or a sound argument in deduction. The other half is you have to have all true premises. And so to show that the God circular argument is sound, you would need to establish the premise that God exists. Well, that's the whole point. That's the difficulty. So the circular argument doesn't really tell us anything interesting. And then if you have access to episodes of The Office, here's one more example of circular reasoning. So, by the way, any of the links, if let's say you didn't have access to any of them, that would be okay. I'm never going to test you on them. They're just extra examples to emphasize the points made here. But you never have to have access to them. You're never going to be tested on them. Okay, I will see you